Democracy is the backbone of a functioning free state, and when it fails, no matter who argues otherwise, your country will be in ruins. And that is exactly what happened in Argentina when the military seized control in 1976 and committed horrific crimes in the country. Their savagery, however, was unable to extinguish the spirit of democracy as Argentines battled back and recaptured it after 7 arduous years by holding an election where people decided who would rule the country. Hello everyone, today on Behind the Date, we delve deep into the political instability that the people of Argentina were suffering and how they overcame it. We will discuss the rule of the military, the first elections after the dictatorship, and the outcome of the elections. This video is not pretty, but it is vital, so stay tuned. Argentina was under military dictatorship from the mid-1960s to the early 1980s. This time was defined by authoritarianism, human rights violations, and economic deterioration. The military regime was marked by ruthless suppression of opposition and contempt for the rule of law, leading to a prolonged era of suffering and instability for the country. Argentina had a variety of coups, counter-coups, and military dictatorships during this period, each with its own specific traits. So, how did it all start? Throughout its history, Argentina has seen periods of military rule. Juan Perón ruled for the first major phase of military dictatorship from 1983 until 1955. Perón utilized the military to strengthen his control and suppress opposition during this time. He also implemented economic changes that supported the military and contributed to the development of a large middle class. Despite certain triumphs, Perón's reign came to an end due to widespread discontent and economic collapse. With the toppling of Arturo Illia in 1966, the second major period of military dictatorship began. During this time, there were a number of coups and counter-coups, as well as a more authoritarian regime. During this period, the military administration attempted to stifle any dissent to its control and enforce its own agenda. To that purpose, the military administration enacted a slew of laws restricting civil liberties and authorizing the incarceration and torture of political opponents. In the 1970s, the national reorganization process began in Argentina, which was a period of state-sponsored violence in Argentina between 1976 and 1983. General Jorge Rafael Videla was in charge of the national reorganization process. Videla declared himself president and selected a series of military officers to the executive in the years that followed. During this time, military and security forces abducted, tortured, and executed thousands of people, the great majority of whom were alleged left-wing dissidents. In addition to human rights violations, the national reorganization process included the introduction of neoliberal economic policies, the removal of labor rights, and the restriction of free speech. The national reorganization process was also characterized by a pervasive climate of fear and intimidation. The government conducted an extensive campaign of propaganda and censorship in the media, as well as a wide-reaching surveillance program. To further spread fear, the military junta engaged in a dirty war against the left-wing opposition, targeting political activists, union leaders, and anyone else whom they perceived as a threat. Aside from human rights violations, the national reorganization process witnessed the implementation of a number of economic initiatives, including economic liberalization and the privatization of state-owned firms. These policies wreaked havoc on the Argentine economy, resulting in widespread poverty and economic stagnation. The policies had a considerable impact on the labor movement as well, as labor rights were severely limited and unions were weakened. The military government also implemented a variety of economic changes, including trade and investment liberalization, reduced government spending, and encouraged foreign investment. These reforms, together with the country's new export-oriented economic model, aided in the establishment of a period of economic prosperity and stability. This time of calm, however, was brief, and by the late 1980s, the country was facing a significant economic catastrophe. This issue, combined with growing public dissatisfaction with the military regime, sparked a wave of protests and demonstrations across the country. In reaction to the mounting turmoil, the military administration began to relax its grasp on power, and on October 30, 1983, Argentina held general elections after years of military dictatorship. This election marked the end of Argentina's worst period of military administration. So, who came out on top? The 1983 Argentine general election was held on October 30. In 1982, the military government had agreed to hold elections in 1983, and the Radical Civic Union had emerged as the leading opposition party. The UCR was led by Raúl Alfonsín, who had been a prominent voice for democracy during the military regime. There were several political parties that participated in the 1983 Argentine general election, but the two main parties were the Radical Civic Union, UCR, and the Justicialist Party, PJ. The UCR was a center-right party, and the PJ was a center-left party led by President-elect Juan Perón, who had been in exile during the military regime. The UCR was seen as the party of the transition to democracy, while the PJ was seen as the party of the return to democracy. The campaign for the 1983 Argentine general election was one of the most intense and divisive in the country's history. The two main candidates, Alfonsín and Perón, had sharply contrasting views on many issues, including economic policies, social issues, and the role of the military in politics. The UCR campaigned on a platform of economic and political liberalization, while the PJ campaigned on a platform of social justice and greater government intervention in the economy. The UCR's campaign focused heavily on the issue of human rights and the need to hold the military accountable for its abuses during the military regime. Alfonsín promised to pursue criminal prosecutions of those responsible for the abuses and atrocities of the military regime, while Perón and the PJ opposed such prosecutions. In addition, the UCR campaigned on a platform of economic liberalization, while the PJ campaigned on a platform of greater government intervention in the economy. President Raúl Alfonsín of the UCR was the clear favorite to win the election and was widely expected to do so, and he did. Alfonsín won the election by decisively beating his opponent Perón. A prime minister was finally selected, but how was his government? Argentina under President Raúl Alfonsín was a period of drastic transformation and change for the Latin American country. After a period of military dictatorship, Alfonsín was elected as the first democratically elected president of Argentina in 1983. During his 6-year term, Alfonsín worked to restore democracy, human rights, and the rule of law to the country. In this essay, we will examine the key policies of Alfonsín's administration, their successes and failures, and the legacy of his presidency. The economic landscape of Argentina in 1983 was in shambles. Inflation had reached an all-time high of 5,000%, and the country was in the midst of a debt crisis. Alfonsín was faced with the difficult task of restoring confidence and stability to the economy. He implemented a number of economic policies to try to bring inflation under control. These included devaluing the currency, freezing prices and wages, and implementing a fiscal austerity program. These policies had some success in curbing inflation, but at the cost of adversely affecting living standards in the country. Alfonsín's most notable achievement was the return of democracy and the rule of law to Argentina. After years of military rule, Alfonsín introduced new legislation to protect human rights and civil liberties. He also worked to restore an independent judiciary and strengthen the rule of law. Additionally, Alfonsín pushed for the prosecution of those responsible for the Dirty War, a period of state-sponsored repression and terror that had taken place during the military dictatorship. This resulted in the convictions of numerous military and police officers, and was a key step towards establishing a culture of human rights and democracy in the country. Alfonsín's administration was plagued by a number of problems. His government was beset by economic mismanagement, leading to a renewed debt crisis and rising public debt. Additionally, a wave of corruption scandals rocked the government, damaging Alfonsín's reputation and leading to a decline in public support. Ultimately, the legacy of Alfonsín's presidency is a mixed one. On the one hand, he restored democracy and the rule of law to Argentina and worked to protect human rights and civil liberties. On the other hand, his economic policies had mixed results, and his government was plagued by corruption and economic mismanagement. Nevertheless, Alfonsín's presidency marked an important moment in Argentine history. His election was a major step towards the restoration of democracy and the rule of law, the most important aspects of any free state.